Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Enemy of the State podcast. It's been quite a while since I've done an episode of this, but as many of you probably know, I was out in Colorado for a while. I had a lot of chance to do some reading and some writing and really get some thoughts together and make sure that the next time that I did a podcast episode, not that the first 3 episodes weren't very concise and well put together, but I had a chance to really make sure that my thoughts on what I'm going to talk about today are very clear. And this, I would say it loosely relates to government, but it's more abstract than that. So today we are going to talk about the utility of evil. And really this can be transposed to several different things. You're going to see as I go through this that there are many areas of life that what I'm going to talk about applies to. So it's not just evil. It is, I would say evil is the largest single group that this is applicable to, but as I go through, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's kind of tough to explain now. So, I guess to start, it's worth explaining that people tend to look at the world as if other people view the world the same way as them, as if other people are viewing the world through the same framework. And what I mean by this is that people will consider everything that they do to be good because otherwise they wouldn't do it if they didn't think it was good. But yet other people will be judged through the lens of either being good or evil or just indifferent. It could just be something pointless. But the point is that people will not view something that they do as evil. And if they do view it as evil, it's only because of a perception shift that occurs after they've already done it. So what I mean by this, and I guess a good example of this, is like, as of recent, the more that I've been getting into philosophy and the more that I've been thinking about political philosophy specifically, I would not give to any charity at all. And it's part of the transvaluation of values, and I think that people would consider that evil, to not give to any charity. But it doesn't mean that I wouldn't help a friend. But again, I wouldn't give to a charity like so many people would. And I think that people would instinctively call that evil. They would say that even if I had all the money in the world, I'm not talking about right now. I'm talking if I had $100 million and I had a tiny house and like a half acre of property. So I had nothing that I was really spending that money on. I would not put it towards charity. I would help a friend if a friend needed help, or somebody in my societal group, my little society, somebody that I had a bond with, I would help them. But charities on the whole, I would not donate to. And I think that a lot of people would consider that evil. And that's what I'm talking about, is like that guttural reaction that I'm sure some people just had to that when I said that even with $100 million, I wouldn't give to any charities. I'm sure that some people had a guttural reaction to that, and that's the instinct that you want me to fit into your framework in the world. And so if I'm not doing what you would consider to be good, or if I'm not doing something, if I have the means to do something that you think would be good and I choose to not do it voluntarily, you would consider that bad, and it would be within your framework. And that's fine. I'm just identifying. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing to do. It's how things are. And in large part, you have to do that because you have to have some idea of what other people are doing. And you have to be able to have an idea of how the world works. So you have to try to, what's the right way to put this? You have to try to sculpt the world the best that you can. And the way that you anticipate what other people are going to do, or you try to read their intentions or their perceptions of an event, is you have to have some framework that they view the world through to understand these things. So the easiest thing that we can do, and the thing that's most proximal to us, is to impart our view of the world on other people. And of course, it's the same thing like in a relationship where, people say love at first sight, and what they really mean is they found somebody who they think fits a certain criteria, but they only have a limited amount of information on that person. They don't know everything that there is to know. Obviously, like love at first sight, they just met them. So they only have a very small amount of information to work with. But they will, if it's a guy towards a girl, the guy will take his anima and project that onto the girl. And so now so he would view his anima as being the ideal female. And now the rest of this woman that he does not know is filled in with this ideal or perfect view of a woman. And it comes from inside the man. And it's the opposite. You can say a woman projects her animus onto a man that she just meets. And this is why it's important to get to know people, because the more that you know somebody, the more that you'll chip away what you have filled in, and you'll replace it with what the person actually, who they actually are. And I mean, of course, there's nuance to all of that. People do it to different degrees, and some people, even when they learn something about somebody, they might try to push it into a corner and just ignore it and keep up that perfect ideal view of somebody. But that's not important for this. And even with opinions, like, that this is the way, even with opinions, where it's like when somebody, if you recommended a book to somebody, you would think that people who don't like that book, or if you like a book, you'd think that people who don't like that book, there's something wrong or deficient with them. And okay, so where am I going with all of this? Well, I hate to bring it to physics. I mean, those of you who have watched the channel long enough know that I studied physics for 4 years in college, so it's tough for me to not take simple and sometimes complex physics concepts and transpose it to other areas to try to explain things. So this is one I think is fairly simple. It's pretty rudimentary. So this bowl on the desk right now is exerting a force down. There's a mass to this bowl that's exerting a force on the desk. Well, the force exerted down is counteracted by the desk pushing up on the bowl. So it's called a normal force pushing up on the bowl. So if you take the bowl away, now the force pushing up is gone. And the psyche works a lot of the same way, where when you remove a force on the psyche, when you remove an external force on the psyche, you remove the internal force that was pushing out. And of course, the psyche is much more complex than something like a table or just a physical object. And this is where you can start to forget how and why you had an instinct to resist a certain force or resist a certain type of evil. This is where you get into the complexities, where the bull and table example kind of falls apart, because this, to go back to a video that I did a little while ago, I think it was the one that I did where it was titled like Speaking Some Truths While It's Still Allowed or something like that. And I mentioned the Umwelt, the Mitwelt, the Eigenwelt, and the Überwelt, which were the 4 layers of reality. The first 3 identified by Binswanger, the last one identified by Durzen Smith pretty long after. It was a few decades. And this right now, these physical objects operate, and this is how physics views it, it operates in the Umwelt. It operates in the realm of nature. Well, our physical bodies operate in that realm. I put the coffee cup on my hand. Physically, my hand is pushing up. I'm not pushing up, but my hand physically is pushing up. But people also act in the other 3 realms. We tend to, so people will act in the societal and cultural environment. They'll act in the internal, in their self, and they'll act in the religious, spiritual, idealist sense. But to make that a little bit more clear, it was Nietzsche I believe it was Nietzsche who identified that having a taste for something, having preference for something, comes from what you don't accept, what you resist. And what you have for a taste, what you have for a preference is born out of instinct. And instinct is something that manifests itself in the world through the emotion of command, which is the will. And so now taste has a direction. Taste is given some form in the world, and it is put towards an end. It is put towards some goal. And it's important to note that instincts are the forces that repel. So that I'll clarify this here in a minute, but just think about that. Instincts are the forces that we have to repel certain things while not repelling other things. But generally the default is acceptance of everything. If you don't know what could be good or what could be bad, it's the general acceptance of everything, and then you start closing certain doors. You start, and the thing is, you never want to close a door all the way, because then you're going to create a system where there's waste. And this is what happens when you look at something like Nazi Germany, where it wasn't a cultural, it was certainly cultural degradation that led to it, but it wasn't an overabundance of chaos. It was an overabundance of order that caused the problems in Germany. It was that they tried to fit people into such a tight and rigid structure that there was waste. And this is the idea with taste, is that it's one thing to have taste. You can certainly have good taste or bad taste, depending on what your conception of good and bad is. But the point is that the taste is directed towards something. So taste is the act of choosing. Instinct is what chooses. Now, instinct chooses by repelling or not accepting something. So when a force ceases, the evil aspect of what was being repelled is now free. So that's the utility of evil. When you have two instincts that are at war with each other, the victor will succumb to atrophy, because the force from the outside causing the force from the inside ceases. And so when you have one that falls away, the other will necessarily fall away. And so a relatable example of this is like if you spend too much time with somebody that you feel stagnation, the force that was driving you to want to spend time with them falls by the wayside, and the instinct to want to spend time with them does as well. And then this is why I believe it was Shakespeare, it might not have been, but I believe it was Shakespeare who said that proximity breeds contempt and distance breeds longing, or something of the sort. That's paraphrasing. But it's basically like when you spend too much time with somebody, you grow contempt towards them, where the things that you used to see as quirky or funny or unique now just become pesky, or they're annoyances. And I think the place to abstract this, the real point that I'm trying to get with this, is that if you have no need to know why or how your culture is strong, you will lose the instincts that made it strong. So there's a general principle that when somebody gains strength, they stop doing what it took to gain that strength. They necessarily lose strength. And if there's one thing for certain that government does, it is make it so that people can lop off every instinct that made them strong. And it does this by creating these societal bonds where it makes a society where, actually Nietzsche characterizes it pretty well, it makes a society where everybody is a patient and a nurse. Everybody is taking care of somebody else and being taken care of by somebody else. So the self-reliance, the hostility, the untrustworthiness, the societal bonds, these all just fall by the wayside because you don't need the instinct that procures them anymore. And so you can think of, the utility of evil is pretty close to the utility of suffering, in the sense that you can think of man as just a flabby cube, and then it's suffering and it's evil that sculpts and hardens man into a Greek marble statue. And it was also Nietzsche who said that the sedentary life, so the life where you stop growing, you stop becoming, because this is the thing, is when people face suffering, when they face evil, they can either use it as a springboard to better themselves, to be I don't want to say to be the best version of themselves, because that makes it sound like there's some alternative reality where they are the best version, and that's not real. So it's the same thing with people who have contradictory instincts, and Nietzsche identifies this with people who are mixed race, and I think he's spot on with that. But you can either, when you face suffering, you can either accept the suffering and bear the weight of it and get past it, or you can be overcome by it, and it can lead to a spiritual and, in some cases, physical death. And you stop growing, you stop becoming something, you get stopped by this force, and that's when you have a spiritual death, when you stop growing. And that's why Nietzsche says that the ultimate sin against the Holy Spirit is a sedentary lifestyle. And I think that that is just spot on, because people like to think that they can crab walk, that they can move sideways, that they can stay constant without moving forward, that they can retain the energy that's in them and not lose any of it, but not have to gain any more. And that's not how it works. You will constantly be losing energy, you'll be losing focus, you'll be losing instinct. And if you're not doing what it takes to uphold that, to retain that, you will lose it. And if you're not aware that you're going to lose it, it will be an absolute shock. So this was episode 4 of Enemy of the State. I hope that it was helpful, talking a little bit about the utility of evil. I think that it's something that should be considered nowadays, especially with the fact that there's more and more pushes to remove suffering from the world, to remove necessary forces that help sculpt somebody into a functioning human being. And we seem so focused on wellness and making sure that everybody's pillow is fluffed and everybody has exactly everything that they need, even if we just have to give it to them. And there's no problem with that. And this is when you get into the problem. I could go on a long tangent right now about some of the problems we see nowadays, but I won't. I'm going to end the podcast here. What are we, like 20 minutes or so? It's not bad. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope that you found something to take from this. I hope that I took something that you know to be true and put it in a more articulate manner. It's something that people, I think there's a certain type of person where it's intuitive, even though they might not be able to articulate it on the spot. So I hope that I've been able to do that, give you some information, give you some information that you can use to spread to other people and help them understand that there is a utility to suffering. There is a utility to evil. And it's like people like to think that, well, if evil was just gone from the world, then that would be great. You know, if unhealthy food was just gone from the world, then people would just be healthy. If drugs were gone from the world, then nobody would be a drug addict. And it's like, if there were no drugs in the world, people would make drugs. If there were no unhealthy foods, people would make unhealthy foods. If there were no guns, people would make guns. People would probably make weapons worse than guns, as they do. It's the idea that you can't just get rid of something and expect it to be gone forever. The things that are in this world are here necessarily, and they're not going anywhere. And the best that we can do is learn to cope with them and understand them, and never forget why we repel them in the first place, or why we don't repel them. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.